All right, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us for our Sleep School 101. My name is Carrie Pace, and along with my colleague, Lauren Apicella, we are pleased to offer this session as part of our Operation Cura Personalis series. Operation Cura Personalis, for those of you that have not attended any sessions, is a series that encourages our community to make more meaningful connections and to take care of themselves and each other with events and workshops that focus on health and well-being. We are excited to welcome back Kirsten Rainey. Kirsten is the founder and CEO of NORTHSTAR Sleep School, offering online classes and in-person workshops to help people get better sleep. Using data-driven approach, her clients learn what behavior changes they can make in their daily lives to yield the most impact. Prior to launching NORTHSTAR Sleep School, Kirsten led sustainability and procurement for Google's 271 cafes across 54 countries. She is a graduate of Princeton University and received a master's degree in international affairs at the Fletcher School at Tufts and an MBA at Cornell. She is a certified sleep science coach through the Spencer Institute. Kirsten has lived, worked, and studied in Indonesia, France, Morocco, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Mexico, Thailand, Italy, Spain, and Australia. After 33 zip codes and an Appalachian Trail through hike, she landed in Bozeman, Montana, which is where she joins us from this evening. As a quick note, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions. We'll also be monitoring the chat. The session will be recorded and we'll share it out in the next few days. With that, Kirsten, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Great to be here. Welcome, everyone. I am going to share my slides, and it's great to see everyone entering into the chat board where they are dialing in from and what their affiliation is with Georgetown. I know there's quite a range of different folks coming in, and we're expecting over 200 people to join tonight. So thanks for being here. All righty. Just get the chat back. All righty. So I'm pretty excited to talk to you about a topic that's taken on so much importance to me that I've decided to focus on it full time. Here's what we're going to cover today. Please use the chat board to chime in on all the questions I'm going to be asking, and please be sure that it's set to share with everyone so that we can all see your thoughts and input. So a little bit of background, you heard a little bit about from Carrie about where I came from. I'm a certified sleep coach through the Spencer Institute. I went to Princeton for undergrad. I studied international affairs for my master's at Fletcher, and I got my MBA at Cornell. And then I eventually made my way to Google, where I thought I'd landed my dream job, leading sustainability and procurement for Google's internal food program that ran cafes around the world for our employees. But after 4 years into my 6-year stint at Google, I recognized that I was not getting enough rest. I was working all the time. I was traveling regularly across international time zones, and I was prioritizing my job above all else. It was starting to really take a toll on my health. And the more I learned about sleep, the more I realized how truly essential it was and is for me and for everyone else. And it was really strange to me. I don't know if this rings a bell for any of you. We talk so much about diet and we talk so much about exercise, but so few of us are talking about sleep as a priority. I became so inspired by this topic and the impact opportunity that I might have in helping my coworkers get better rest that I created a 90-minute crash course on sleep that I started teaching to fellow Google employees at various offices around the world when I would go there for my day job. And then in 2020, I left Google altogether and I launched NORTHSTAR Sleep School, offering sleep courses and devoting my energy full time to this topic of helping others get the most restorative sleep possible. So that brings us to today and to this webinar. And my goal is that you will also be inspired to prioritize sleep, and you'll agree that we really can't afford to not prioritize it. Rest is such a huge component of having balance. And hopefully you won't reach the point of total burnout that I did when I was at Google before you come to this conclusion. But I think it's really important to bring this up because my guess is that many of you might be from the same cloth, whether you're an MBA student or you're on the faculty and staff at Georgetown or you're an alum. My guess is that there are a lot of type A overachievers out there on this webinar who might be able to relate to this idea that it comes much more naturally to many of us to put our foot down more firmly on the gas pedal rather than to take our foot off the gas pedal. And with sleep, it's both a quantity issue and a quality issue. It's not just about more hours in bed, although that's part of it, but it's also about ensuring that the sleep that we're getting is as restorative as it can be. And it's only when we're truly well rested that we can do everything in our lives as well as we can. It really truly fuels our personal and professional dreams. And now, we're still in the midst of COVID. It's an unusual time, as all of you know. I imagine that some of you are still working from home, studying from home. How many of you are feeling, those work and personal boundaries are still blurred? On top of that, some of you might be homeschooling children. And many of us are dealing with more stress in our lives than ever before. Stress and anxiety, about 100 things, about COVID, about perhaps how to teach your son's third grade math course, about politics, social injustice, wildfires. There's so many things going on in the world right now. So it's just it's really great that all of you have taken the time to focus on such an important topic, sleep. So thanks again for being here today. So I'd love to use the chat board for this first activity. This is going to be a little icebreaker for all of us. Where were you for your best night of sleep? What were some of the circumstances of one of your best nights? Was it in a special place, a special environment? Were you on vacation? I think it's worth talking about this because there might be some elements of the best night of sleep or one of the best nights of sleep that you've had in recent memory that we can try to recreate in our daily lives today. So while all of you are thinking about that and typing in those examples into the chat board, I'm just going to briefly share one of my best nights. These are 2 screenshots from my phone from the app of my Aura sleep tracking ring, which I've been wearing for 3 years. And these 2 screenshots are showing some of the best sleep that I've gotten in recent memory. This was at a rustic hot springs area in Oregon. I used to live outside in Portland and then in the Gorge. And so I regularly attended these hot springs where I slept very, very well. And you can see my total sleep was 9 hours and 56 minutes, which is not normal for me. That's really high. I had no awakenings all night long. And I always sleep really well in this particular environment. And it's not a mystery as to why. There's no caffeine there. There's no alcohol there. I eat a really healthy dinner every night before 7 p.m. I spend the days soaking in hot springs, hiking and reading. I can't use my phone. I can't use any other technology. There's no electromagnetic field radiation from my phone. My body likes all of these things. It gets dark really early and I go to bed very, very early. And it's great to see what some of you have written in the chat board. A day of playing sports, being really physically active, right? Matt says when it's cold, absolutely temperature plays a role, and many of us sleep in too warm an environment. So being in a cold environment can help. Christina notes on vacation, being on the beach, windows being open. Yeah, when we're relaxed, we're not thinking about work or school. All of that matters. Christine says on a business trip, a combination of a dark room, comfortable sheets, and a busy schedule. Great. Yeah, it's different for all of us, but there's a lot of common themes. I think it's important to pay attention to what in your life leads to better rest so that you can try to repeat that if you can. I'd love as the next activity to think about what is the example of one of the worst nights ever for you. The circumstances might have been out of your control. Maybe you were in a waiting room at a hospital. Maybe you were stressed out about a job interview the next day, or an important presentation you were giving. Or maybe you don't sleep well on nights when you work late on your computer, and we're going to talk about that in this webinar. Similarly, how can we take notice of these variables and avoid these factors that may have contributed to some of your worst nights? And yeah, a lot of you have given some good examples. Eating a late meal. When you eat food matters. What you eat matters. When you're not feeling well, when you're sick, when you're stressed. Think about all these things for you, and think about those that are in your control that you might be able to avoid. In the chat board, please share if any of you currently use any kind of sleep tracker. So for example, Jawbone, Whoop, Apple Watch, Fitbit, or Aura. Aura is what I mentioned. This is what I wear on my finger, or something else. Okay, great. A lot of you have examples of sleep trackers. That's great. Let's think about last night, whether you have a tracker or whether you don't. Do any of you know how much sleep you got last night? Please write your estimate in the chat board. I actually got over 8 hours, which I'm pretty excited about. That doesn't always happen. A few things to keep in mind. When we estimate our sleep from the night before, it's really common that we overestimate how much sleep we've gotten. So as an example, if I went to bed at 10 p.m. and I woke up at 6 a.m., it would be really easy to conclude that I got 8 hours of sleep. But as we all know, in reality, it takes time for us to fall asleep. We often wake up during the night, even if we're not aware of it the next day. We have many small awakenings. And so the actual number of hours that we've slept is usually less than that 8 that I mentioned if you went to bed at 10 and woke up at 6. Great, and we see a huge range in the chat board of examples of how much you're getting. And I think a sleep tracker can be really helpful in giving you a more accurate estimate of how much you've gotten. I think there's really some truth to Peter Drucker's famous quote that you can't manage what you don't measure. And look, at the end of the day, it's pretty clear to you and to me on the mornings when we wake up feeling refreshed from a great night of sleep versus the mornings when we wake up feeling not so great. How we feel, of course, is the best indicator. However, I am a firm believer in using a sleep tracker, whether it's Aura or whether it's something else, because I think there's a lot of great data we can dig into that can help us make tweaks in our behaviors the day before, in our bedroom environment, in our sleeping schedule, and in our wind down routine. And we're going to talk about some of those today. This is what the Aura Ring looks like. It actually has sensors which monitor your body's pulse and movement and temperature, and then it summarizes your data into 3 scores each morning. You get a sleep score, you get a readiness score, and you get an activity score. And you have the ring itself, you have the app on your phone where you look at the data, and then you also have a dashboard that you can access on your computer. And because I found this data to be so invaluable and so much more productive than simply trying to estimate what's working and what's not, I've actually made the Aura Ring a required part of my work with clients. So let's talk about a few myths around sleep. So here's the fundamental question, how much do we actually need? We're all really busy people. I imagine you guys are as busy as I am. Whether you're an MBA student or a faculty member or staff, my guess is that you have really limited free time. In fact, perhaps it was a bit of a challenge even just to squeeze in this webinar tonight. Wouldn't it be great if we only needed 5 or 6 hours of sleep each night? How many of you have heard this, or maybe you've even said this yourself? Does this sound pretty familiar? The truth is, unfortunately, only 1% of the population ranges for adults from the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night that we need. And that goes in both directions. So there are a few people who actually need more than 9 hours, and there are a few people who are truly okay with getting less than 7 a night as an adult. But that 1% is a genetic mutation. So if we look around the room of this, with this virtual webinar, and you think about all your classmates and fellow colleagues that are on this webinar, there are very, very, very few of us on this webinar who can truly thrive on getting less than 7. You might be really skilled at this point in your lives and being fully functional, looking awake, seeming alert. But instead of framing it as how much can we get by on a night, another way of looking at this is how can I be at my absolute best in every part of my life, from a productivity perspective, from a physical perspective, and from a well-being perspective. Fitbit is one company you all might be familiar with. In fact, some of you might be tracking your sleep with a Fitbit and tracking your activity. They have quite a lot of sleep data at this point. And this slide is showing that the average Fitbit user is getting 6 hours and 38 minutes of sleep a night. So just think to yourself of how does that compare with what you're getting on average? It's only fairly recently we've been starting to become truly sleep deprived. This is a Gallup chart showing that in 1942, the average sleep was 7.9 hours a night, and now it's 6.8. 100 years ago, less than 2% of the population in the US slept 6 hours or less a night. And it's even more dramatic with kids. So if you think about 5 to 18-year-olds, they're sleeping 2 hours less a night than their counterparts 100 years ago. And I have all kinds of theories as to what is contributing to that. I think our gadgets are not helping. I think social media is not helping. How many of you have heard this myth? Or maybe you've said it yourself. I can make up for it on the weekend. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Unfortunately, we can't bank sleep. So we need it every day, every night. And the best thing we can do is consistently get good sleep throughout the week, whether it's a Tuesday night or a Saturday night. So we can think about each night of sleep as its own unique opportunity. Like busyness, it's a source of pride for many of us, especially those of us who are overachievers, that we'll sleep when we're dead and now is the time for living. I would dispute that. I think we need to rethink this notion entirely. I'd argue we can get the most from every day if we're well rested. From a learning and memory perspective, getting sufficient sleep is actually the most efficient thing we can do. So the joke's sort of on us for those of us, and I'm just equally in this category of those of us who used to stay up all night studying for exams in college or in grad school. We would have actually been better off just going to bed. And the benefits of good rest go far beyond just learning and memory. If we don't get enough sleep, our body experiences increased inflammation. We experience increased levels of the stress hormone cortisol, which is something I've been struggling with over the past few years, especially as I wrapped up my work at Google. Being in the fight or flight mode all the time is not healthy. And it's shocking the number of health issues that we're dealing with in our bodies that might not be as severe or might not be issues at all if we were simply getting enough sleep. Matthew Walker is a professor at UC Berkeley. He's also the author of a great book called Why We Sleep, and he consults at Verily, the life sciences company of Google's parent company, Alphabet. And he says sleep is the single most effective thing we can do to reset our brain and body each day. Unfortunately, many well-known people, including some of the folks on this screen, who have enormous responsibilities or had enormous responsibilities, they didn't seem to get the memo. They did not prioritize sleep or don't. As an extreme example, I'm going to just share Thomas Edison's sleeping schedule. He thought it was a total waste of time to sleep, and he tried to minimize it. He followed something called a polyphasic sleep cycle, which means he had many sleep sessions over a 24-hour period, which is in contrast to what most of us do, a monophasic sleep schedule where we sleep in one big chunk during a 24-hour cycle. He would get 3 hours of sleep total during a 24-hour period. In contrast, the folks that you see on the screen are some of today's business leaders who have a very different approach to sleep, and they don't treat it as a burden. In fact, they embrace it. As a couple of examples, Jeff Bezos has claimed that he tries to get 8 hours of sleep a night, and he has credited being well rested with helping him tackle decision fatigue while he was at the helm of Amazon. As another example, Ariana Huffington suffered from total exhaustion 10 years ago, and she now has a business called Thrive that's dedicated to taking better care of yourself. She has a regular wind down routine in the evenings, and we'll talk more about wind down routines in just a minute. And she removes all electronic devices from the bedroom, which is a great tip. Let's dig into the stages of sleep, of what's actually happening during a typical night. So this is a progression throughout a night of sleep, and you have multiple sleep cycles each night. Each cycle is typically 90 to 110 minutes a night and includes both rapid eye movement, or REM, that's shown in the light orange peach color. And then it also includes non-rapid eye movement shown in the light blue, which is when you're not dreaming. One of the things that's interesting is that REM is the sleep stage most similar in terms of your brain activity to your awake state. And another thing to note is that most of the deep non-rapid eye movement sleep that you get is concentrated early in a night of sleep. And most of your REM sleep when you're dreaming is concentrated later in a night of sleep. So you'll see more of that light orange peach color on the right. So what's really interesting, and if you have a sleep tracker that provides this kind of data for you, one thing that might be interesting to track over time is what happens if you stay up one night till 2 a.m. for whatever reason. It could be that you're studying, it could be that you're out partying, who knows what you're doing, but you will notice a bigger toll on your non-REM sleep if you go to bed much later than normal. Similarly, let's say you get up really early, like 4:30 or 5, to squeeze in a workout. Well, you might really, and this is something I'm guilty of, you might really, feel better after that workout, but you might be depriving your body of more of the REM sleep, the dream sleep. So it's just something to look at over time as you look at your sleep schedule and you look at your data. So each of these stages, the REM and the non-REM, are actually providing different things in our bodies. And I go into a lot more detail in this in my 6-week course, but for today at a really high level, I think it's important to share that REM helps you with two main things. First, it helps you integrate the day's experiences with the rest of your life experiences, kind of like shuffling it into a filing cabinet of memories. It also helps you process your day's stressful moments so that you can emerge the next day feeling, an emotional reset. Non-REM is the restorative stage of sleep, when your body has a chance to repair itself. You need both REM and non-REM every night, and they perform very different benefits for your body. So what happens when we don't get enough sleep? I don't think any of you, I know I wouldn't dream of pulling out one of these disgusting dishes out of the dishwasher before the dishwasher had actually run. But that's actually exactly what's happening when we're trying to function when we're not fully rested. So what's going on in our brains is that we have these glial cells, and they shrink by up to 60% during non-REM sleep. So that is a positive thing. So if the glial cells were represented by these dirty plates that you see, it's like they've shrunk and there's more room between them to clean them out. And in your brain, more space around the neurons means your cerebrospinal fluid can clean out all the metabolic refuse left from the day. When we don't have sufficient sleep, our brain cells look like these large dirty plates, and amyloid plaques can build up in our brain, and this can actually raise our risk of developing Alzheimer's. So while there are innumerable health implications from not getting enough rest, today I want to focus on two specifically. The first one I want to focus on is how sleep deprivation impacts learning and memory, which I would imagine that's a priority in an academic setting like Georgetown. If you don't sleep well on the first night after learning something, you lose the chance to consolidate those memories, even if you get lots of great sleep later in the week. So this is true whether you're studying for an exam, taking a language class, playing an instrument, or learning anything new at all. So it's really important to get a great night of sleep after learning something so that you can lock in those learnings into a safer spot in your memory. Matthew Walker calls this the save button. You also need great sleep the night before a day of learning to prepare your brain for learning new things. So I can't overstate this point. Like many of you, I used to work so hard in school, from elementary school all the way through grad school. And it was often so tempting to stay up 1 or 2 more hours to cram more facts into my brain for that exam or that important thing the next day. But this is a really inefficient use of our efforts. I and all of you, we'd all be truly better off going to bed. I'm not saying don't study. I'm not saying don't prepare. But it's sort of the incremental gain from staying up a few more hours, it's not worth it. You're not going to perform better. So I think that's just been a really interesting takeaway. And this is something I really wish I knew, 30 years ago. The second risk of not getting enough sleep that I want to focus on today is the connection between sleep and eating habits. Sleep deprivation impacts your hormones that regulate your hunger and your appetite. So it makes it very difficult to control your weight when you're not well rested. A lot of us pay a lot of attention to our diet and to our exercise, but we treat sleep very casually. How many of you, when you've been very tired, or perhaps you've been jet lagged from traveling across time zones, you find that you make different food choices? Let's say you get off a plane, it's been a red eye, you wake up, you grab something at the airport. Does that happen to any of you, that it's not the same? Carrie mentions, yes. Yeah, I know for me, when I was traveling a lot internationally for Google, I would eat things in the morning, like, I don't know, a donut or a croissant, things that I would not normally eat. And there's a biological reason for this. So what's happening is you have one hormone in your body called leptin, and normally that lets you know when you're full. But when you're sleep deprived, you make less of this hormone, so you're less likely to feel full. At the same time, it's a double whammy, because when you're sleep deprived, you have increased levels of another hormone called ghrelin, which lets you know when you're hungry. So you feel more hungry than you would otherwise if you were actually well rested. We also crave unhealthy things. We crave cookies and chocolate and ice cream and salty snacks. So the encouraging thing about all of this is that when we do get enough sleep, it really helps control body weight. And just because I explained that the sort of biological reason there is our hormones are not out of whack as they are when we're not well rested. I'd love to talk a little bit about caffeine and blue light. So there's a lot of things that interfere with our sleep. I'm sure all of you have experienced a lot of these yourselves. Caffeine, alcohol, screens, noise, light, temperature, food. Today, we're going to focus on 2, caffeine and then that blue light from our digital screens. Let's talk about coffee. How many of you are coffee drinkers? Anyone? I did have coffee today. Did anyone have caffeine already today? How much did you have? Does anyone know, like 2 coffees, 3 coffees, 5 coffees? Yeah, a lot of us are very loyal to our caffeine, right? What's actually happening in our bodies is it tricks us into feeling alert and awake. And what's going on is caffeine is blocking the sleepiness signal that is normally communicated to our brain by adenosine, which is a compound in our tissues. And that seems great, right? Like, what's the problem here? The problem is that caffeine stays in our system. A half-life of any drug, as many of you know, is how long it takes for your body to remove 50% of its concentration. Does anyone know how long the half-life is for caffeine? Any ideas? How many hours for half of it to be removed from our system? Yeah, great. Okay, good. Yeah, it's 5 to 7 hours. So that means if you have a cup of coffee at 3 p.m., I know the afternoon is a challenging time. I know for me, it's a really challenging time. Right now, it's actually 4 p.m. in Montana where I live. But I feel good because I'm excited to be with all of you today. But normally it is a lower point in my energy. So if you have a cup of coffee at 3 p.m., half of it's still in your system at 10 p.m. So again, cup of coffee at 3 p.m., half of it's still in your system at 10 p.m. The other thing I'd like to point out is decaf. How many of you have decaf, after dinner? And that's sort of a way to wind down in the evenings. I know I used to, for many, many years, I had decaf after dinner. We might think we're playing it safe, by opting for decaf late in the day, but actually decaf does have caffeine. It has 15 to 30% of the dose of a regular cup of coffee. So, it should be called reduced caf instead of decaf. It's a little misleading. It's just something to think about. And finally, what worked for you 10 years ago or in college, might not work today. Our bodies change. And the older we are, unfortunately, the longer it takes our brain and our body to remove caffeine. So you might be more sensitive to it now than you were many years ago. I also have many people who say, well, Kirsten, that's all fine. I've heard what you've said, but, I have a double espresso after dinner every night and I'm fine. I fall asleep just fine. And that might be true. However, the sleep that you're getting when you have caffeine coursing through your system is not as restorative. So it's just something to keep in mind that even if you're able to actually fall asleep, your sleep is not as restorative. So keeping an eye on caffeine, I think caffeine can be a great tool and I certainly use it, but I'm very, very careful about the volume that I consume and when I cut myself off. Another thing to think about is trying to give your body a little caffeine holiday once in a while. Maybe you're going on a camping trip for a weekend and maybe it's just a time to kind of reset your body. It's something to think about. So, I'd also love to point out that there's a lot of things that we consume that have caffeine beyond just coffee. Does anyone have any ideas? What has caffeine in it besides coffee? Chocolate, right. What else? Good. Anything else? Green tea, yes. What else? Soda, yes. Great. Those are all good things. Anything else? Yep, Coke, absolutely. Excedrin, yes. So there are a number of medications, such as migraine medication, some painkillers like aspirin, ibuprofen, and some prescription drugs like beta blockers that reduce blood pressure. These all have caffeine, and it's just worth being aware of. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not here to tell you when to take anything, but if it's worth looking into, if you can ask your doctor if you could take any of those things in the morning, if those are things you regularly take, instead of taking them before bed. It's just a point, because caffeine can interfere with our sleep. So check with your doctor. I had a client named Laura who, sleep deprivation for her led to migraines. So then she was forced to drink a Coke or take migraine medication, and both of them helped a lot. But they prevented her from falling asleep the next night. So it was a really vicious cycle. So it's just something to be mindful of. So let's talk about our screens. How many of you like to read in bed on a digital screen, whether it's a phone, whether it's an iPad or a tablet of another company tablet, or whether it's your laptop? Does anyone read in bed? Yeah, a lot of this is very common, right? This isn't meant to be like a shaming game. It's just a very common thing. So when we look at our screens late at night, whether we're in bed or whether we're at our desk or on a couch, the blue light emanating from our screens delays the onset of melatonin. And melatonin signals to your body when it's time for sleep and time to wake up. And in addition to that, it's not just the blue lights that's the issue, it's also the temptation to respond to one more work email or read one more Facebook post or whatever. It can often get us riled up and get our brains active, whether it's good or bad. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad news or stressful news. It could be a really interesting, exciting show that you're watching, or it could be like a really interesting piece of news that's happening in the world. So that doesn't put us in a relaxed state for sleeping. 90% of people regularly use some sort of electronic portable device 60 minutes or less before bedtime. So, what's the solution for all of us? We're all completely addicted to our gadgets, myself included. And a few things that you can do. One is you can develop a strict schedule with yourself about when you turn off all your gadgets. Like, as an example, no phones, iPads, laptops, etc. after dinner, or, that might not be realistic for you, especially those of you who are MBAs who are working all the time. Maybe it's an hour before bed. Could you turn all of them off an hour before bed and plug them in somewhere else that's not right next to your bed? Some people just have no technology at all in the bedroom. They just say, you know what, I'm going to plug everything in the living room or the kitchen, somewhere separate or as far away as possible from the bed. Some people only read printed books and magazines in the evenings. And other solutions to think about is, if those are not realistic for you, could you switch your devices to night mode, which you can find in the settings feature, or can you get the Flux app for your phone or your laptop that changes the screen to reduce some of the blue light? Or can you get blue blocker glasses that protect you against blue light? A couple companies, Swannies, SWANNIES is one company, or True Dark, TRUDARK. Those are two companies that, there are many companies out there, but those are two good ones that make blue blocker glasses. Question has come up in the chat about, does it matter? Can you use a Kindle instead? Is a Kindle better in terms of the blue light? There is the best option if you have to use digital is the Kindle Paperwhite is one model of Kindle that has less blue light than any of the others. However, there is still some blue light. So the best option, unfortunately, is to switch to a paper book or a paper magazine, a real magazine if you can, and try to get off of those devices at least an hour before bed. For me, if it's only an hour, my sleep is still disrupted. So for me, I have to get off my devices several hours before bed. But try different things. And David asks, what does reading do? Stimulant? Yes, reading can be a stimulant. The blue light itself, if it's an electronic device, is delaying the onset of melatonin. So that's one problem. I think reading a physical book can be a great way to wind down. But ensure the content is not so engaging that you're going to be up till 2 in the morning. I've had a problem of, sometimes I get a really good book and I just literally lose track of time. So it has to be, moderately interesting, so it's worth reading, but it can't be so exciting that you're going to be up till 2 in the morning with your brain stewing. For some people, nonfiction gets them, thinking about things. And so maybe just trying to find something fiction to read before bed could be a good idea. So, would love to just share a little bit about this diagram here. So our circadian rhythm is our body's internal clock, and it's helping us regulate our sleep and wake cycle each 24-hour period. And in this diagram that you see how two of our hormones, cortisol and melatonin, are changing throughout that 24-hour period. This diagram has a light blue background showing daytime and a navy background showing nighttime. In addition, you see two squiggly lines. The red is showing cortisol going up and down, and the blue is showing melatonin. So this diagram is showing how those hormones fall and rise depending on what time of day it is. So typically our cortisol will spike in the morning and then it will decline until it's very low at night. For melatonin, it's highest in the middle of the night. And the reason I show this diagram is it's really illustrating why it's so challenging to pull an all-nighter or to do shift work and be working all night, or to be jet lagged because we're out of sync with the natural environment of light and dark. It's also showing why the blue light from our devices, like our phones and tablets and laptops, is so problematic, because that blue light is delaying the onset of melatonin, our sleep hormone, which signals to us that it's time for sleep. And then finally, the third reason why I'm showing this diagram is because it helps to illustrate why consistency of our sleep time is so important. So when we go to sleep and when we wake up, that helps our body lock in the circadian rhythm, and you start waking up without an alarm if you start getting up at the same time every day. So if there's one thing that you take away from this webinar, it would be trying to get into a regular sleep schedule. 7 days a week is like one of the most critical things that you can do. So I'd love for you to think for a moment, think about your own life, your own commitments with work, your personal life, your natural cycle of when you're energized, your family. Think about all those things and think about what is a sleep schedule that would work for you for this week, something to try for a week starting tonight. what time will you, and feel free to enter into the chat board if you're willing to try this, what time will you go to bed for the next 7 nights? And what time will you wake up for the next 7 mornings? And I'll share, for me, I try to be asleep by 10 p.m. and I wake up at 6:30 every day, whether it's a Saturday or a Tuesday. So think about your own situation and what works. And while people are doing that, there's a couple questions that have come up in the chat board about melatonin. And I'll just answer that while people are entering in their sleep schedule. So melatonin can be a very helpful tool to take on occasion when you're traveling from one time zone to another and you're trying to get into a new time zone. Taking a small amount is okay, but it's not something I would recommend taking every night. Instead, what I would recommend, I see it as a Band-Aid. I would recommend on a daily basis thinking about all the factors that are preventing your body from making melatonin naturally. So if we're on our blue screen, the blue light from our screens until 2 minutes before we try to go to sleep, we are not helping ourselves. We're not doing ourselves any favors, because that is delaying the onset of melatonin. So getting off blue screens before bed is what I would recommend before starting to take melatonin. So great, thanks for everyone for entering in your sleep schedule. That's awesome. Those are all really great. It's a great thing to commit to, and it's a great thing to actually put on a calendar or tell others about for accountability. So it's just a really good takeaway. If there's one thing that you try this week, it's really, you'll feel so much better in the morning without having to pull yourself out of bed because you're on a regular schedule. In addition to having that regular sleep schedule, another really impactful thing you can do is develop a wind down routine. This would include relaxing behaviors. Doing those same relaxing behaviors provides a cue for your body that you're approaching time for sleep. Some people take a warm bath or shower or hot tub, or if you're fortunate to have access to a hot tub or sauna before bed, those can provide really great results in helping your sleep. And what happens is, counterintuitively, the warm bath or shower actually cools your body down a couple of degrees. And what's happening, our bodies actually need to drop a couple degrees to initiate sleep. So when you take that warm bath or shower, your blood flow brings the heat from your core to the surface. So basically, a warm bath or shower is actually helping your natural circadian rhythm and getting your body prepared to go to sleep. How many of you have something in your wind down routine that you do every night that helps relax you? Feel free to type into the chat board. A warm bath is just one example, but there are many, many other things that you can do. If folks want to enter into the chat board, a cup of tea, journaling, a warm beverage, great. Yeah, all those things are great as long as they don't have caffeine. There's a lot of really amazing herbal teas, or frankly, even a cup of hot water with lemon can be very relaxing also. Reading a paper book, great. Those are all good tips. Yeah, listening to relaxing music. One of the nice things about journaling is it gets what's in your head out of your head onto paper. That can be a great way to kind of get some of the things that might be stressing you out, kind of get them out of your head onto paper. Other things you can do, listening to relaxing music or listening to a relaxing sleep story on various apps. Does anyone use Headspace or Calm? These are meditation apps, and they have great meditation examples, but they also have adult sleep stories where there's a relaxing voice that shares a story of a different duration. Has anyone tried Headspace or Calm? Headspace, great, okay, awesome. So as important as it is to engage in relaxing activities, it's also really important to avoid others, like staring at our digital devices or exercising late or eating dinner late. So I'd love in the chat board, if please share one thing that you plan to start doing tonight. Oh, Carrie mentions that the MBA students have a year-long subscription to Headspace. That's awesome. That's really fantastic. I use Calm to meditate in the mornings. I alternate each year, and I now have a Calm membership, but I've used Headspace for many years. I think it's wonderful. I think they're both wonderful. So please share one thing that you plan to start doing tonight. Anything, any ideas? There's a question about late night snacking, healthy versus unhealthy. I'm a fan of trying to stop eating by 7 p.m. Give your body a break. It's good for a whole range of things. But eating late does not help your sleep. Eating spicy foods late at night does not help your sleep. Eating sugary foods late at night does not help your sleep. Consuming alcohol late at night does not help your sleep. Alcohol specifically is like one of the biggest killers of REM, our rapid eye movement. So alcohol is not helping your dreaming. It's very interesting to see this in the data. Like when I look at my Aura information in the mornings, it's so clear to me the nights that I have had a beer and the nights that I haven't. The other thing that's really interesting about alcohol is that, another thing like caffeine, as we age, our ability to metabolize changes. So you might have been fine 20 years ago having a beer at 6 p.m. and maybe now you're not. And I know that's very depressing, but think about what impacts you and whether it's worth it. It's sometimes easy to kind of get in the habit of having a glass of wine every night, but if it's impacting your sleep, you might feel less rested the next morning, and then it's kind of a vicious cycle. So just think about that, and think about also what works, for you might not work for somebody else. So for example, think about whether a glass of red wine or a glass of white wine might affect you differently, versus beer versus spirits. All of us are different. And I know that just as for whatever reason, I know that red wine impacts me more than white. I think about timing. So it's better if you can, if you're going to have a glass of wine, have it at 5, have it at happy hour rather than having it as a nightcap after dinner. I know that when I worked at Google and was traveling quite a lot, my teammates used to always try to convince me to go have, one drink after dinner at the hotel, whenever we were traveling. And, eventually, I started switching and having herbal tea, and then everyone made fun of me. And then I just started going to bed because I found that having alcohol late at night just destroyed my sleep. There's a question about broken sleep from kids, pets, early risers making noise, the negative impacts, how do you mitigate them? Earplugs are an amazing solution. I use earplugs all the time, and it helps you from waking up from some of that noise in our environments, whether it's noise from pets, noise from a partner, noise from the street. We're all in different environments, but noise can be very, very disruptive to our sleep. So a few takeaways. The vast majority of us need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. We cannot make up for sleep debt on the weekends, unfortunately. Maintaining a consistent sleep schedule all 7 nights per week is key. Our circadian rhythm regulates our sleep-wake cycle during a 24-hour period. Caffeine, alcohol, light, noise, temperature, eating, and exercise all impact our sleep. It's important to ensure our bedroom environment is conducive to good sleep. So thinking about your bedroom being cool, dark, and quiet. Can any of you say for sure that your bedroom is all of those 3 things? Cool, dark, and quiet. It's really hard. Yeah, Carrie asked about whether falling asleep with a TV on is a good idea. I would say, first of all, I wouldn't have your TV in the bedroom. I know that this is controversial and it's your personal decision, but it would be better to keep gadgets out of your bedroom altogether. And I would not recommend falling asleep to the TV on. The TV is going to keep going and you're going to be sleeping, and it's going to be noise in the background that might be disruptive, whether you're actually waking up or not. I would try to keep the TV out of the bedroom altogether. A fan for white noise. Yeah, a fan can be a great solution. There are also white noise machines you can get that can be great for helping with drowning out noise. Earplugs, I think, are a really cheap solution that are portable. You can, whenever you're traveling, you can bring them. I use a brand called Max, M-A-C-K. Out of all the earplugs I've tried, I think it is the best in terms of actually staying in my ear and in terms of blocking out more noise. So, there were a few other things. Having a regular wind down routine signals to your body that it's time for sleep. And then finally, having a cutoff time for technology can be very helpful. And this is really hard. Look, I'm just as addicted as everyone else to my phone, and it's really hard, but I have a little station, a little charging station in my living room that I use every night. And I plug my phone in, turn it to airplane mode, and then I go read a real book. That's my wind down routine, and it really works. So 3 things that you can start doing today. Consistency is critical. So having a consistent sleep schedule for the next 7 nights and see how you feel after those, at the end of that week, see how it goes. Second is being mindful of caffeine, the timing and the quantity, and digital screens before bed. And third, develop a wind down routine. Those are 3 things that you could start doing today. So if you like what you've heard today and you want to learn more about this topic, or you know someone who might want to learn more, I have a couple of additional resources I'll share really briefly. NORTHSTAR Sleep School has a signature course. It's a 6-week course called 6 Weeks to Better Sleep. We dig more into, how sleep impacts your productivity, why your food choices are better, why your mood's better, why your ability to learn is better, and what are all the tweaks we can make to support sleep. We've talked about a few of them tonight, but there's many more. So there's in-person workshops. There's an online course that meets by Zoom over a 6-week period. I do small groups, one-on-one. And then finally, I have a self-paced program you could do entirely on your own schedule in your own environment. So feel free, if you want more information, feel free to email me. You can go to my website that's on the screen, and you can set up a 15-minute free consult by Zoom if you want to chat more about those options. There's also an e-newsletter you can sign up for. And then finally, I have a podcast called NORTHSTAR Unplugged that's about rest and about unplugging. And there are a number of helpful sleep tips. There's a lot of great guests on there. The content's all free. And I've been really inspired by some of the folks that I've met. So check that out if you want to learn more. Here are just a few examples. Charles Hall invented the waterbed. Alex Sujung Kim Pang talks about this idea of a 4-day work week and also how rest impacts creativity, which is pretty interesting. Tara Youngblood in the top right is the co-founder and CEO of Chili Sleep. So we talk a lot about how temperature impacts sleep, also about insomnia and about weighted blankets. And then Thea O'Connor talks about the power nap and how we can integrate that into our day like a coffee break. So instead of going for that second espresso, how could we take a nap, even just a 10-minute nap? How could we work that into our workday? Christopher Lindholz talks also more about naps and nap pods at work. Katie Halloran talks about how to get your kid to go to sleep. So if any of you are parents, that might interest you. And Barra talks about psychedelic therapy for PTSD and for sleep and more. So thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to join today. My contact info is on the screen if you want to stay in touch. And if there's any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat board. Travis asks, what are your thoughts on naps? Yeah, I think naps can be a really great tool. I think the key thing for naps, and again, there's more detail in those podcasts, but the key takeaways I would say are keeping them short. Like keeping them start off with like 10 minutes, just even if you don't fall asleep, just like lie down for 10 minutes and keeping them early in the day. So I wouldn't do any naps after 3 p.m. unless you're planning to be out partying all night. And I don't recommend that. So try to keep them, maybe right after lunch is a great time to just lie down for 10 minutes if you can. I know all of us are in different environments, and one of the beauties of COVID and a lot of us working and studying remotely has been having a little more control over our schedule. And so it's easier, obviously, at home to be able to just lie on the couch for 10 minutes after lunch than it might be if we're, in our normal work setting. So keeping it short and keeping it early in the day are 2 things I'd recommend. The problem if they end up going too long is that we end up getting into a deep sleep cycle and then we wake up feeling groggy, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So keeping them short and sweet and early in the day would be my recommendation. Matt asks, what's the impact of the snooze button? Great question. So the snooze button, unfortunately, releases cortisol, our fight or flight hormone. So when we hit the snooze button, and our alarm goes off again, we continue to get that fight or flight experience, which is not great. So one of the benefits of having a regular sleep schedule that I mentioned earlier is that our body starts learning when it's time to wake up. So I wake up before my alarm goes off and I don't hear it at all. I don't even have that surge from the alarm, that cortisol surge. So highly recommend not using the snooze button. For some people, just moving their alarm across the room is a helpful quick fix. So, and Dan asks about pros and cons of prescription sleep aids, cannabis, and sex affecting sleep. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on all these topics, but quick answer would be prescription sleep aids can be helpful for people who have chronic sleep problems. However, I would if you're on them, talk to your doctor about how can you wean off of them, because basically your sleep is not as restorative. So I worked with a client who had been on taking Ambien for like 40 years, and you look at his Aura data and he has no deep sleep. So falls asleep fine, and he gets basically like 6 hours of light sleep. And that's really scary to me. So I'm not a doctor, and I'm not here to tell you what to take and what not to take, but I would say if you are on them, talking to your doctor about, some of these other solutions we've talked about. I think there's so many things you can tweak in your day-to-day, which we've talked a lot about some of them today, that are a great place to start. And having a very, very gradual wean off program is something I would think about. Cannabis, there's a lot of mixed evidence about cannabis. It does help a lot of people with anxiety and helps them with relaxing, but there's mixed and so that can be very helpful in terms of falling asleep. But there's mixed results on whether it's interfering with your quality of sleep as well. So again, I don't recommend taking anything every single night. I think trying to work on all these other solutions first is a better place to start. If you're experiencing a lot of anxiety, I would start with meditation. Meditation, even just 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, can be a great place to start. And sex is one of the few things that I would recommend that it can happen in the bedroom because it doesn't interfere with sleep, and tends to, actually be very helpful for many people. So highly, supportive of that, but not supportive of other things in the evenings, like having television in the bedroom and looking at our screens until the last possible moment. Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. These have been all really fantastic questions, and really appreciate all the engagement on the chat board. I hope all of you have a great evening, and I hope you sleep well tonight, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions or want to look into any of these classes. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kirsten, for joining us. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.